Welcome to the Lazar Focus. I'm your host, Amanda Borschel-Dan, here with our talent diplomatic correspondent, Lazar Berman. Lazar, thank you so much for joining me again in our Jerusalem office.
Thank you. Glad to be here. It's the first time anyone's ever called me talent. So it's a big
You have
day
the
for me.
voice, you have the looks, you have the brains, you are the talent of Lazar Focus.
You and my mother are the only ones who think that, but I will take it.
Excellent. All right. Well, today we're going to talk about the Saudis. And last week, U.S. President Donald Trump met with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman in the White House. And after that, there were a bunch of announcements. Among these announcements were $1 trillion in investment in the American economy from the Saudis. There was also the Civil Nuclear Cooperation Agreement, also advancements in critical minerals cooperation, and an AI Memorandum of Understanding. But one of the agreements or announcements that Israelis have been hoping for a long time was not announced, and that is, of course, Saudi normalization. So today we're going to talk about the idea of the Vision 2030 from Saudi Arabia, how Israel could or could not play a role in this, including, of course, the idea of normalization, and what Israel's role would be in this new Middle East in which the U.S. is increasingly cozying up to Saudi Arabia. So we'll conquer all of these topics and more when we're back.
I was worried, or I still am, about Mamdani because it was interesting. I was following this, of course, and here's the guy, a young man who's running on a platform of affordable housing and free buses and community grocery shops. And it's not that he's interested in geopolitics. He didn't speak about women's rights in Iran. He didn't speak about the Uyghurs in China. He didn't speak about the hunger in Sudan, by the way, a much larger tragedy than the one occurred here in Israel and Gaza. But he was really, really persistent about talking about what is happening in Israel. So this is, it's not that he's a humanitarian or somebody who's really preoccupied with geopolitical problems. He was just focused on us, and therefore we have a name for people who are focused on the Jews and what the Jews are doing. And therefore I was worried about the fact that he was elected and about the way he was campaigning about Israel and the Jews.
I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here with Lazar Berman. So Lazar, just to begin with, let's get a bit more of an understanding of who is the Crown Prince and what is his role in Saudi Arabia.
Sure. So he is certainly something new in Saudi Arabia. So therefore, to understand him, I think we have to understand what Saudi Arabia has been until the rise of MBS. Saudi Arabia is a very, very conservative place. The House of Ibn Saud was one of a number of tribes in the Arabian Peninsula, and they rose to power through this alliance with radical conservative Wahhabi clerics, and that allowed them over the centuries to gain power over over parts of the peninsula, to defeat the Hashemites. We've talked about that in the past, to gain control over Mecca and Medina, the two holiest cities in Islam.
And just to remind our listeners, of course, that the Hashemites are in charge of Jordan. Their kingdom is Jordan. Move on.
So,
Lazar.
right. So they used to have all of the holy sites, and now they don't have Jerusalem. They don't have Mecca and Medina. And they, over the past century, have ruled over one of the most conservative societies on earth in the Middle East. This very strictly run society where women didn't have rights. They couldn't drive. They had to have guardians to leave their house. A very, very conservative place where there wasn't movies, there wasn't any sort of real Western entertainment, really kept the Western world in terms of cultural influences at bay. How were they able to maintain this is because they have oil. And we've spoken about this in the past as well, that whenever you consider geopolitics, economy, anything, you have to take energy into account. And I've said this many times, and so have others. Ultimately, people have to make sure that they can heat their homes and that they can, go where they need to go. And if they don't have that, then everything will fall apart. Oil in Saudi Arabia is very easy to extract. It has the world's largest proven reserves, and they have always been either the top producer or one of the top three. Today, they're one of the top three with Russia and the United States. And that made them very, very attractive to the United States. Basically, the relationship starts in 1933 when American oil companies go to Saudi Arabia. They're allowed to start exploring there and start extracting the oil. And the relationship really gets cemented in 1945. So we're toward the end of World War II. Franklin Delano Roosevelt is very sick. You can see videos of this meeting. He's coming from the Yalta Conference. It's very clear that the Allies are going to win, and they're kind of dividing up the world. And one of the most important final moves that FDR does in his life and in his presidency is to understand that America needs to lock down its oil supplies and make sure no one else, the Soviets, the British, don't do so. And he has this initially secret meeting on the USS Quincy in Egyptian waters with King Abdul Aziz Al Saud, who founded the modern Saudi kingdom. And that meeting went very well. They can't really speak to each other. They have to have an American translator. They fight a little bit over the future of British mandatory Palestine and what should happen with the Jews. But they come to an agreement that basically the Saudis will provide America with its much needed oil, and America will build bases and make sure that the kingdom is protected. And that is what dominates the relationship even to this day. That is basically the arrangement. That's why you have massive American bases there. That's why defense cooperation remains. Now, this conservative, kind of backward, very strange kingdom starts to change with an unlikely rise of this figure, MBS. Now, after Abdulaziz, there's other kings, and they're always his sons. He has many sons. I think it was something like 45, of which 36 survived into adulthood. But there's this group of 7 sons who come from his preferred wife, and they are the ones who take over after him. And King Salman comes to power, and he does something very surprising. He raises up his son, not as crown prince initially, but as defense minister, interior minister. No one knew who this kid was, right? He was very young. I think he was in his late 20s at the time. And the American ambassador had to try to figure out who he was. No one really knew who this person was, who was given a very senior role. He wasn't crown prince. There was someone named Mohammed bin Nayef, MBN, who seemed like he was in his 50s, seemed like the logical choice. But as King Salman, it was clear, was sick, he wasn't really running the country, he was quite old, MBS started to flex and started making his moves. And you can see how aggressive and even inexperienced he was, but he was very, very successful and very, very brutal. In 2017, there was this series of really bizarre incidents where they call it the shakedown, SHEIKH, because he sidelines all of the potential internal opponents to his rule. He invites them to a hotel, takes away their phones. Some of them say that they were tortured. It seems pretty clear. One of them even died in custody. So it seems like they were basically threatened, saying, either you give up a lot of your money, billions, tens of billions of dollars that they've basically skimmed off the Saudi economy, and you support me, or you either disappear or you get killed. And one after another, all these very, very powerful people in a very, very powerful country, in a very rich country, get in line behind MBS, and he consolidates his power. This was presented to the country as this anti-corruption thing, because these people obviously had gotten rich by running this oil-rich country. And it was quite popular amongst the Saudi populace. There was another strange incident in which Lebanon's prime minister, Saad Hariri, comes for a visit and is kidnapped by MBS's people. They hold him in Saudi Arabia. They take away his phone. There are reports that he was held, confined in a chair and slapped. And they make him read a resignation letter from Saudi Arabia while they're holding him, and he only gets to go back home to Lebanon several days later and eventually rescinds his resignation. But this shows the kind of game that MBS is playing. Of course, this takes place while he is leading a very aggressive and a very bloody and ultimately unsuccessful proxy war in Yemen against the Houthis, and trying to present what he says is a second Hezbollah being created by Iran on his border. So we can say in general that even before he became crown prince in 2017, again, a very rapid rise for someone that no one had heard about 2 years before, he consolidates his power. He is very, very aware of the Iranian threat. He will flex his muscle even in Lebanon and, of course, in Yemen to try to deal with that threat, and sees, of course, the United States as the way forward, as the key ally. And at the same time, I should stress, he starts modernizing the country, starts allowing women to drive, movies to take place. A lot of restrictions on women are raised. So he's very popular. He's seen as something of a reformer, but he's certainly no liberal. He runs with a very, very tight fist, an iron fist, and it is absolutely a place where if you say the wrong thing, you could disappear. So on the one side, anti-Iranian, looking to the West, or a modernizer, but on the other hand, absolutely a dictator in line with other dictators that could absolutely rely on very brutal methods to remain in power.
So, if I'm not mistaken, alongside these, window dressing, new liberalisms such as women driving, etc.,
I
he
actually don't think it's window dressing. It's a real reform because he understands that he has this massive young population that first of all, is a potential to overthrow, and he has to modernize the economy. So they're real reforms, but it doesn't mean that he is some liberal. That's what it is. So they're actually true reforms to society.
Okay, my question is this, and thank you for your correction. Alongside his real reforms in allowing
Yes.
women to drive, etc., he also, at the same time, if I'm not mistaken, completed massive reforms of the curriculum and brought the school system and also the religious system away from this extremist mentality that it had been following for generations. Is that true as well?
Yeah. So it's this kind of multifaceted modernization scheme. So the economic, I think, is the most important one, where he's trying to move them away from just being an oil economy, which is the source of their power. And you could see what the UAE and what Qatar has done to diversify, become a tech center, become an AI center, become a financial center, become the place where international multinational corporations will headquarter, and also invest a lot into becoming a sports hub. So you've seen this massive investment in soccer leagues and a rival golf league, and hosting the World Cup, and developing all these tourist options. So all of that goes hand in hand. But you're right, they can't do that if the education remains, for the same kind of principles from 100 years ago. So they have to start preaching this religious tolerance, and really, it's also for the outside. It's also make sure the next generation is capable of interacting with the world. That younger generation wants to interact with the world and doing it in a way that, let's say, young Emiratis do, because they understand that they are being somewhat left behind by some of their much, much smaller Gulf partners and Gulf competitors.
Right, exactly. That's my point. They want to have a role on the international stage. And in order to do that, they need to literally speak the same language, including Western languages, but also be able to understand the mentality of the people they're trying to do business with. So let's turn to this idea of the Saudi Vision 2030. And as you mentioned, Lazar, of course, Saudi Arabia is among the top three in terms of oil producing countries. But it seems like MBS has a vision for the day after, which is, kind of rare in a way in our in our day and age to have this vision. So what is Saudi Vision 2030?
Yeah, so I think you make a very important point about the rarity of a vision, because we live in a democracy, and democracies don't really have big visions. Something like the Soviet Union would have these, 10-year plans, 5-year plans. So I think it's healthy that there's not a massive vision, but of course this is not a democracy. So the good side of these type of governments, of non-democratic governments, is that they can marshal resources toward one plan. I wouldn't want to live like that, but there certainly are some benefits to it. And one of them is MBS says that he wants to modernize, and he wants to modernize in a way that no other country really is, on these kind of moonshot multi-hundreds of billion-dollar, trillion-dollar projects that will absolutely are meant to transform the way people live, these buildings that have never been built before. So let's talk about NEOM. NEOM is in northwestern Saudi Arabia on the Red Sea coast. The idea is to create this international city, so it doesn't have the same rules as other places in Saudi Arabia. So theoretically, even if there is not normalization between Saudi and Israel, Israelis would be able to go there and take part in what happens there. He is also trying to build a ski resort in the desert there, and a floating business district, all sorts of crazy things. I think the craziest is this skyscraper that is horizontal. So it's called the Line, which is supposed to be, 1,000-something feet tall and pretty narrow, and everything is contained in there. You have flying taxis, you have very, very quick public transport, is made of solar panels, zero emissions, all sorts of crazy things. Sounds like, a hellish prison to me, but that is the vision. Now, since he has a lot of money, he can bring in all these McKinsey and all sorts of international consulting firms that are happy to continue to get money, but they kind of cook the books and keep, the costs are spiraling out of hand. They keep cooking the books to say, okay, we'll just bring in more revenue from all sorts of rent and purchase. But it's clear that this is not moving forward. There's only a quarter of the foreign investment that was predicted. The plans keep getting clipped. So now I think what they're focusing on is, instead of this, I don't think 100-kilometer building, it's now something down to like 2 kilometers that they're working on. So I think a lot of the plans are understood to be unfeasible, but there's still a ton of money going there. And this is one of the moonshots. But there's other things that are more realistic, which one of them is to compete with Dubai and Doha, and to bring the headquarters into Saudi Arabia and to replace them as the regional financial center and the regional corporate center. I think that is much more reasonable. But of course, it has to be a place where Westerners want to come and live, which means they have to be able to drink alcohol. They have to be able to dress as they want. They have to be able to go to Western schools in the country. So all that takes that transformation. And since MBS's priority is this transformation and to make the country the most powerful economic and tech giant in the Middle East and one of the top in the world, that means he is open to that, because what he wants is the economic development and the consolidation of his own power.
Okay, let's go to a short break.
What if prayer doesn't work? This question strikes us as a distinctly modern one, an outgrowth of the slow disenchantment of the world. But in truth, the question is an old one, and one given space to breathe here.
Welcome to Thoughts and Prayers. I'm your host, Jessica Fisher. Join me on a deep exploration of the relationship between religion and modernity through personal stories, classical texts, and conversations with leading rabbis, scholars, and educators.
You're almost not supposed to be doing this interview.
Our prayers accumulate on God's doorstep, piled outside like an unimaginably tall stack of letters. We cannot give up on the relationship because God doesn't come to the door as quickly as we may like. So let's keep knocking. Perhaps the gates of compassion will be opened.
Join us every week on Thoughts and Prayers wherever you get your podcasts.
And we're back. So last week's meetup with President Trump may or may not have helped MBS bring this vision to fruition, because 2030 is just around the corner. I mean, for old people like me, it's a blink away. So I wonder what your thoughts are in terms of everything that came out. We're talking about $1 trillion investment into the American economy, fine. Then also the mineral aspect. Can we talk about that? Because I think most people, when they hear minerals these days, are thinking about China. So what are you thinking about this?
Sure. So Trump has always liked MBS. He defended him in the 2018 killing of Jamal Khashoggi, that was a Washington Post reporter who was killed in in Turkey, in Saudi Arabia's embassy there. He was dismembered, and understood that MBS had ordered that hit. And he really didn't care about the human rights aspect of what was going on. He saw them as a partner. He understands kind of family business dynamics. His family, the Trump Corporation, has a lot of investments and future projects there as well. So it's a very natural partnership for him. Famously, President Biden in the campaign said that he was going to turn them into a pariah. And MBS remembers that. The Saudis do not like the Democrats. Um, Now, Biden had to kind of go back on his word because after the Russia-Ukraine war, and the spike in oil prices, he needed more oil coming into the market. He wasn't willing to do that in America, so he had to go to Jeddah and give that famous fist bump and beg MBS to release more oil to the market. He did not do that. It was a failure. It was a humiliation for Biden. So when Trump comes back to power, the Saudis are very happy. If you remember, in May, his first planned foreign trip, there was the Vatican, but that was different because the Pope died, was to Saudi Arabia. Just like in his first term, that was the first trip. And there was all these promises about what we're going to do. And basically they consolidated those promises this month in Washington. So let's talk about the promises that you brought up. There was the defense aspect of it, the F-35, which Israel's very focused on, Israelis are very focused on. But I don't think the defense is the main one here. The main one is the economic. So really a commitment.
Before you jump forward on economy, one thing that jumped out at me in this defense package is tanks that Saudi Arabia is asking for, I think, 100 tanks or in the hundreds of tanks. And that I find a bit confusing. You know, what kind of war are they expecting that they'll need to use tanks for?
Well, they're generally the biggest purchaser of U.S. Weapons in the world. Right now, Ukraine is getting more, but that's kind of a unique situation. But in terms of the pure purchaser, that's Saudi Arabia. So their whole army...
300. I just checked my notes. It's 300 American tanks.
So if you look at any of their Air Force, you look across their military, it's going to be American weapons. Of course, they need a ground force, right? Their main threat would come from the Houthis in the south, which has mostly been aerial, but there could absolutely be some sort of militia move into parts of Saudi Arabia. They definitely have a domestic threat, both from the conservative Wahhabis who are not happy about this Western turn, and I would say at least 15, but probably more of the country is Shiite and have been involved in uprisings in the past. And then any sort of Iranian-backed proxy, whether it comes from Iran or elsewhere, is absolutely a threat. So they have to make sure that they maintain a capable military. Of course, the Air Force is something that they're very concerned about, that they really want to invest in, that allows them to threaten the Houthis, and of course to maintain some sort of parity with Iran. That's very important to them. So they absolutely have serious military threats, but their main defense is the U.S. umbrella. Now, let's talk about some of the economic things. So Trump loves to hear that there's going to be a massive investment into the U.S. economy. It's something that obviously Israel cannot provide. Now, this $1 trillion promise, there's no details on it. What will that look like over the course of how many years? There's not going to be $1 trillion. I mean, the entire Saudi sovereign wealth fund is $1 trillion. So he's not going to invest the entire thing in the U.S. right now. But he can certainly make large-scale purchases, large-scale investments. And that is absolutely serving Trump's interest because, he's saying he's going to get foreign investment. That's a lot of his foreign policy is about changing the trade relationship. So that's something that the Saudis can give him. He was very happy to get that. The AI part is part of transforming Saudi Arabia's standing in the world. Of course, they have so much energy that they can power these things, and that could make it easier for the U.S. And to have these data centers here and to be plugged into the U.S. AI market, this is absolutely done with an eye on China, because China and the U.S. are in this global competition to lead in the AI space. China kind of has had a lead in the past, and the U.S. is working very quickly over time to make sure that something like the Saudis is not in bed with the Chinese in terms of helping them with AI. So I think that makes a lot of sense for the U.S. as well. There's the nuclear question, and the Saudis have they've always wanted to have their domestic capability. Now, if you want to do it most innocently, you can ask, why does this oil superpower, which has 1/10 of the people of the U.S. and it doesn't need all that energy and can sell it all over the world, why does it need nuclear power? And they would say, because we want to sell our oil, we don't want to use it domestically, so we want to power things domestically. But also they keep an eye, of course, on Iran, which is making them very nervous in terms of their nuclear thing. And they have said that if Iran goes to a nuclear weapon, then they will break out as well. So they want to at least develop that capacity and that knowledge within the country. But they have had to sign some very restrictive gold standard agreements on terms of international oversight. So there's going to be a ton of oversight there as well. But also that's something that Israel keeps an eye on.
So, Lazar, tell me a little bit more about the minerals, because we already talked about one link to China, the AI, but the minerals is such a hot topic around the world, of course, as the cars that are manufactured today need them, et cetera, et cetera. So how does this cooperation between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia feed into this part of the diplomatic war, shall we say?
Yeah, so this is also done with an eye on China. China's a world power in terms of rare earths. And the fact that, in Corona, we understood our danger of having our supply chains so dependent on China. So for rare earths, it could be, economic, also a lot of military applications. We don't want to have China be able to cut us off from those things. So the U.S., has a lot of its own rare earths, so does Canada, but it is also looking for other options there. So the fact that the Saudis have some important rare earths that they can sell to the U.S. and not to China, that is also very important as well. So China is hovering over all of this. Now, the Saudis and the Chinese have drawn closer in recent years. There is not insignificant defense cooperation there, but which I think the Saudis did partially to get the U.S. to pay attention, and the U.S. certainly did. So I think the Saudis are getting what they want. They certainly don't want to become dependent on the Chinese. America can offer much, much more. America's presence in the Middle East, it is there in many different ways in terms of bases, in terms of naval power. The Chinese just don't have that in the Middle East. So the preferred partner has always been the U.S., but they want to signal that they have other options, and they want to make sure the U.S. Doesn't take them for granted.
Okay, I want to talk about, with all of this cooperation between Saudi Arabia and the U.S., why isn't Saudi Arabia part of this peace deal that Trump, trumpeted in mid-October? And why are we seeing countries such as Turkey, Qatar, and, Egypt pretty much running the show there? Why isn't Saudi Arabia part of this deal too?
Saudi Arabia certainly feels that the Middle East has gotten beyond their control in recent years. So they've seen what Iran has done across the region. Again, they tried to confront that militarily in Yemen. They tried to block Hezbollah's political strength in Lebanon, but that was not successful. There was the very famous 2019 attack on the Aramco oil facilities from Yemen, which Iran was behind. And when the U.S. didn't protect them there, that changed their approach to Iran. They understood they need to protect themselves from Iran. The U.S. won't do it, so they're going to open up new diplomatic channels with Iran and calm things down. They needed that stability. So they still see Iran as a threat, but they prefer to deal with that threat through dialogue right now. But they've seen another power rise up in the past 2 years, and that's Israel. And they understand that even though Iran's influence and power in the region has been dramatically clipped, and they're very, very happy about that, it's been basically replaced by Israel. So they're seeing these countries, which are rivals in some ways, partners in other ways. Certainly, Israel's not a threat to the Saudis, but it's still not aligned. They don't have aligned interests on a number of fronts. So they're seeing these other countries get a leg up on them. They're seeing Qatar get all these promises and deals with the Americans, same with the UAE. So the region is moving ahead and they're left behind. So they're trying to figure out, where should we invest? I don't think they think that a big investment into Gaza, which is not going to work, is a good use of their money or their soldiers. So they're letting everyone else, not everyone else, but other countries who have different interests, spend resources and time in Gaza. They're happy to express their support, to throw a little bit of money around, but they're not going to get involved as, let's say, at Turkey and in Egypt. They are getting very involved in pushing the idea or decisions about moving forward with the Palestinian state in very concrete ways on the international level. So they had the French-Saudi initiative over the summer that translated into a UN resolution. there's been plenty of UN resolutions, but this time it had new countries, new Western countries behind it. That is very much what they've been a part of. And of course, this Security Council resolution coming out of Gaza, which they were very much behind as well. So they have been involved in the Palestinian issue, not by putting much on the ground, but by trying to show that they're leading the international charge to get this Palestinian state moving forward. So that's how they see it. But I'm sure they're waiting. They're not gonna put troops on the ground. They're waiting to see what shakes up in Gaza, and if they need to, they will try to swoop in. But for now, they're staying back.
So the idea of normalization with Saudi Arabia has been this carrot dangled on the horizon for Israel for, so many years. And of course, there are many indications that Hamas saw this, and that was one of the factors leading to the October 7th, 2023 onslaught to stymie this effort. And I think for the most part, most people think that Israel has the most to gain from this kind of normalization. But there are those voices that are saying that actually Saudi Arabia would be best served by having this cooperation with Israel. So where do you fall on this disagreement, whether it's more in Israel's interest or more in Saudi Arabia's interest?
So I don't see Saudi Arabia having a huge need to normalize with Israel right now. It's kind of a long-term idea. They understand that Israel is not the problem in the region, and it's an important signal to the West. And they don't want other countries to be like the UAE and Bahrain to be overshadowing them in that regard. Israel has a ton to gain, obviously. The most powerful Arab economy, heavyweight in the Middle East, a religious leader, the custodian of the two mosques. Certainly, Israel, in its 100-year-long quest for acceptance in the region, this would be the biggest step, even beyond making peace with Egypt. So I think Israel has a lot more to gain. Right now, Saudi Arabia gets what it wants from Israel. Gets defense cooperation, intelligence cooperation.
The U.S.
From Israel.
From Israel. Okay,
right.
So I said corrected.
Yeah, no, absolutely. When they need, they were part of this coalition to shoot down Iranian drones and missiles in 2024. And it's pretty obvious there's a lot of defense and intelligence cooperation behind the scenes, and the Israeli businessmen know how to get there. It's not like Israeli business is a huge thing. There's some tech that they would like to have. I'm sure they have access to a lot of it, but they are trying to not be dependent on anyone, and these deals with America makes them even less dependent in the future. So they don't really need Israel for that much, and Israel could really, it would be just a game changer to normalize with Saudi Arabia.
Lazar, this has been incredibly enlightening as usual. So thank you, as always, for joining me for the Lazar Focus.
Thank you. And I guess we'll see you next week for the next episode.
For sure. Thanks for listening to this week's Lazar Focus. If you have any questions or comments, please drop us an email to podcast@timesofisrael.com. This episode was produced by the Podwaves. Until next week, shalom.